My name is Sarah. I'm 26 years old and work in sales administration. I've been married to my husband, Kyle, for 2 years, and we're currently expecting our first child. Looks like my sister, Emily, is also pregnant. Our kids will be in the same grade. I can already see Mom's happy face, my husband joyfully says. I sometimes think he's a bit of a mama's boy. Well, my mother-in-law is quite warm and gentle, so I understand his fondness for her. Since my sister-in-law and her husband live with my in-laws, there's some distance between us, and so far, it hasn't been a problem. Or so I thought as I dreamed of a smooth-sailing life. At 9 months pregnant, my baby was diagnosed as breech, and considering the risks, I was advised to have a C-section. The thought of being cut open terrified me, but after Dr. Johnson explained the dangers of delivering a breech baby, I decided to go through with the C-section if the baby didn't turn around. I'm sure my husband feels the same way. So, before the chaos of hospitalization, we went to the hospital together. And I was surprised by his reaction when we were about to sign the consent form. A C-section? Really? Kyle turned to Dr. Johnson with a look of displeasure. Dr. Johnson, who had explained the situation politely, seemed perplexed. Why does it have to be like this? Well, because the baby is breech. It's dangerous to deliver normally. But dangerous. Isn't that just an excuse? C-section is quicker than normal delivery, right? You just want to take the easy way out. Don't be so lazy, he scoffed. My husband laughed through his nose, mocking me. To think he accused me of being pampered. How could he even think to say such a thing? What do you mean by that? Well, it's true. You're already deciding on a C-section even though the baby might still turn. That's just running away, he argued. But that's not the point. Illness starts in the mind, they say. By talking about a what-ifs now, you're just making it impossible for the baby to turn. Don't you get that? He said, sighing as if talking to a naive child. Sir, please consider your wife's feelings. She needs to prepare mentally for what's ahead, Dr. Johnson tried to reason. Kyle's expression remained unimpressed. It's easy for you to say. If she goes through with this, it's me who'll be embarrassed, not you. I'm her husband, he retorted. What? How can you say that to Dr. Johnson? He snapped back. It's because of something wrong with your body that the baby is breech. And now you're getting angry about it? Can't you just give birth normally like everyone else? What does he mean by normally? I was stunned by his words. Isn't it normal for parents to want their child to be born healthy and safe? If you're really going through with this C-section, consider it as grounds for divorce, he said, pushing the consent form back. Not even saying goodbye to Dr. Johnson as he left. I don't think C-section is something to be ashamed of. I've heard that 1 in 4 women give birth by it. It's my husband's outdated views that are the problem. I tried to explain it to him several times. But he kept saying things like, kids born by C-section miss out on the tough journey, so they become wimps. Or you only truly feel love when you endure the pain of childbirth. You won't be a proper mother. His prejudices were just too irrational. The baby remained breech until the 10th month of pregnancy. I can't wait any longer. Sign the consent form, I urged. What? If you do, we're getting a divorce, he threatened. He thought I would back down at the mention of divorce, but I had already made up my mind. A man who can't prioritize the safety of his child has no right to be a father. I snatched the consent form and told him to divorce. Fine, let's get divorced then. My ex-husband, wide-eyed at my sudden words, muttered, "You're going to regret this," as he agreed. On my way back to my parents' house, I called them about the divorce. My parents seemed surprised to see me return so suddenly, but they comforted me after hearing the story. The next day, feeling a bit down about having to discuss alimony and child support later, I received a call from my ex-husband. I ignored it a few times, but eventually answered due to the persistent ringing. He sounded almost tearful, saying, "Help me." It was strange that he was reaching out so soon. When I listened, he explained that he had been attacked by sudden, excruciating pain since the morning, thinking he was dying. He groaned with stabbing pain, made a mess diving onto the dining table, and couldn't find any painkillers. He even cursed my absence. But eventually, he couldn't endure it anymore and called an ambulance himself. At the hospital, he was diagnosed with kidney stones and prescribed pain medication. He said he was now home, discussing hospitalization options with his family. Oh, really? I couldn't help but feel cold about it, thinking if the painkillers were working, he should be able to manage. Kidney stones usually pass naturally, right? My father had the same diagnosis before, and he naturally passed the stones after being prescribed painkillers and medication. Well, that's possible, but... My ex-husband's response was hesitant. The stone they found must have been relatively small. In that case, medication and observation would be possible. It hurt unbelievably. If I had surgery, they'd just break it up with a laser, and it would be over quickly. I can't stand going through that again. That's just running away, I said, echoing a phrase I had heard before. What? Don't look for the easy way out. Endure it. It might pass naturally. And what if it doesn't? Don't talk about what ifs. Illness starts in the mind, right? If you don't believe it won't happen, I replied. I couldn't help but laugh. My ex-husband fell silent and hung up the phone. Sometime later, I gave birth to a lovely baby boy. His name is Ethan. I felt relieved to have chosen a C-section when I heard his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. I hadn't heard from my ex-husband, but one day, my former mother-in-law called. Sarah, I heard from Kyle that you're separated now? Her tone was not accusing, but rather worried. Apparently, my ex-husband had relied entirely on his mother for hospital preparations and all the arrangements. When she entered the house with a key he gave her, she screamed, thinking burglars had been there, due to the mess. Kyle won't explain anything clearly. He just keeps insisting that it's all Sarah's fault for leaving, she said. I explained the situation to her. The prejudice against C-section, the slander towards me, and why I had to go back to my parents for the birth. When I mentioned I had filed the divorce papers, she seemed lost for words. I was nervous about what she might say next, but then she said, I'm so glad the baby was born safely. It's all thanks to you, Sarah. Thank you so much. She didn't bring up my ex-husband's mistakes, and I chose not to mention them either. Would you mind if I meet Ethan? I would come to you, but Emily is about to give birth, and I can't leave. It's my first grandson, after all. Is that okay? Feeling a bit overwhelmed by her earnest request, I nodded. When Ethan and I visited my former in-law's house, my former mother-in-law greeted us with a beaming smile. My former father-in-law, a large man, peeked out from behind. Welcome, Sarah. And this must be Ethan. What a cutie. Right. Yes, come on in, he said, blushing and inviting us inside. The living room I was led into had a warm and friendly atmosphere. But then, someone emerged from the back, completely ruining that mood. Hey, Sarah. How dare you show your face here so brazenly? It was my ex-husband, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. Was I tricked into coming here? I glanced at my former mother-in-law, but she said nothing. You dumped all the hospital care on Mom and completely neglected the housekeeping. And you still call yourself a wife? You ran back to your parents, but just because you had a child, it doesn't make everything okay. Just because I had a child. You look so nonchalant. You went through with the C-section after all, even though I strongly opposed it. You just took the easy way out. If the kid turns out spineless, it's on you. You're a disgrace as a wife. His words were as outrageous as ever. Sorry to burst your bubble, but I'm not your wife anymore. I filed for divorce the day I left. What? Don't mess with me, I won't accept this. Just as my ex-husband raised his fist and yelled, a calm voice from my former mother-in-law said, enough of this. In a suddenly gentle tone, my ex-husband said, of course, Mom, you're right. She's just a failure of a woman. My former mother-in-law, squinting her eyes as if to say don't say another word, sharply retorted. I told you, Kyle. Apologize to Sarah. I'll only accept an apology from you. Her calm tone surprised even me. Mom. My ex-husband was flustered. Sarah, I'm truly sorry. I failed in my upbringing. I was foolish, not believing everything was true. I apologize. My former mother-in-law said quietly, bowing her head. So, she wanted to see her son's true colors. It's not your fault, Mom. As my ex-husband tried to continue, she shot him a cold glare. You said that since C-section don't involve the pain of childbirth, the mother won't feel love for the child. Well, it's true, isn't it? If they come out easily. How can you think that being cut open doesn't involve pain? Childbirth doesn't end at birth. From that moment, you start raising them with all your might. The wound on the stomach hurts, throbs. Just smiling at the cuteness of your child can cause sharp pain. You endure the pain because you love them and want to raise them. Her words conveyed sympathy towards me. But, it must hurt, right? But then what about the child? If they come out so easily, they'll miss out on life's trials and become spineless. Listen, Kyle. Even if a child's character is affected, it's secondary to their life, right? That's what I told my mother-in-law. You and Emily were both born by C-section, she said with a faint smile. My ex-husband was stunned and frozen. Shocked? Well, it's a pity to think your mother was a failure. But the spineless one you're talking about is you. Distraught and holding his head, my ex-husband looked at me when she said, I was surprised to hear the story from Sarah. Sarah. It's your fault. Because you went for a C-section, all this happened. As my ex-husband raised his hand at me, my former father-in-law stepped in, preventing any harm. My former mother-in-law, looking down at my ex-husband on the floor, said, Emily is likely to have a C-section for her next child too. Having a brother like you is a bad influence. Emily too. Apparently surprised, possibly due to his sister complex, my ex-husband turned pale. A husband who can't respect women is truly worthless. She snapped and then, as if to say this conversation is over, signaled to my former father-in-law with her eyes. He silently grabbed my ex-husband's arm and dragged the screaming man to the front door. Unable to resist his large father, my ex-husband was thrown out of the house. A husband who doesn't cherish his wife is really the worst. My former mother-in-law smiled sweetly. It was her usual, charming smile. The financial arrangements for the divorce were all handled by my former mother-in-law with the satisfactory result of receiving plenty of alimony and assurances that child support would be paid. Would it be okay to see Ethan sometimes? She asked. Realizing her intentions, yet having become friends with Emily, I replied, of course. My ex-husband's disownment hadn't been lifted. After announcing our divorce at work and foolishly revealing the outdated reason, he became a pariah among the women and finally realized the disconnect between his views and society's. Honestly, I was astounded that he hadn't realized it even after what his mother said. Constantly pestered by my ex-husband for a reconciliation, I offered him just one piece of advice. Kidney stones can recur, you know. I advised him to watch his diet and then sent that text before blocking him. I couldn't help but laugh, thinking this topic would be a hot conversation piece for a while.